you want to spin around and one-shot the entire screen while getting insane loot and running a Mach 10, then this build is for you. Spin to Win is back. This build has insane map clear and with a few adaptations, still holds surprisingly exceptional single target damage. Breach is the best mechanic right now, and this build is perfect for farming it. Alright, now getting into our DPS setup, we have Spiral Volley as our main DPS skill. So Spiral Volley is the skill that lets you spin around like a maniac, and if you have Frenzy Charges, it does way more damage, and it also chains. It fires a shit ton of arrows, right? So because it uses Frenzy Charges, we have Perpetual Charge linked up to it, just so we don't use them as much. We have Heft for more damage, Brutality for more damage, Long Shot for more damage, as we're generally speaking, lots of the enemies we kill are super far away and sometimes even off the screen. And for our last link, we have Ambush. This is a really key component of the build. As you can see, this is 100% more critical hit chance, not increased. It doubles our crit hit chance against full health enemies. So here, our goal will be to one-shot the enemies before they even come onto the screen. You'll see this theme of damage and critical hit chance, critical hit damage against full health enemies come up a few times in this video. It really is an interesting adaptation, I think, that's perfect for this type of build. It lets us really not spec into attack speed at all. Attack speed really doesn't scale well with this skill, if you see. It has plus 0.4 seconds to total attack time as a hard-coded feature of it. So I actually invest almost nothing into attack speed with this build, which gives up a lot of affixes for more interesting things that can scale our damage. So now we know this build uses Frenzy Charges. So how are we going to generate those Frenzy Charges? Well, there's a couple of ways we're going to. First things first, Sniper's Mark. Now, Sniper's Mark is, you mark an enemy and the next time you get a crit, you consume the mark. So, we have mobility and more cast speed linked up to it, not really a big deal. Because we have such high crit chance with things like Ambush, the general gameplay loop of this build is you Sniper's Mark an enemy, and then you, a full health enemy ideally, and then you use your Spiral Volley and one-shot the entire screen. And then you have basically a feedback loop. This skill has a very low cast time, right? It's like, it says 0.5 seconds, but it's less than that with this in there. It's completely fine. You have mobility in there. So this is it's pretty smooth, honestly. It also makes your critical hit do more damage, which we'll get into later as well. We also have Electrocuting Arrow. I don't really ever use this that much, but it's nice to have it just in case, you know, somehow get trapped, or like against the boss you could use this. Rain of Arrows, which is also something I barely use, because it also consumes Frenzy Charges, but it can be useful with our alternate setup, and I end up putting Break Armor in there just to help break my enemy's armor. The next is our other way to generate Frenzy Charges, which is Combat Frenzy. So, Combat Frenzy grants you a Frenzy Charge when you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy. So, first of all, we have Profusion in there for more charges, and we have Precision for more accuracy, because we have extra Spirit to play around with, right? So, you see it said pin there, so we go into our gear really quick. We want a second way to generate Frenzy Charges, because just the Sniper's Mark, we kind of really want more Frenzy Charges because it makes our Spiral Volley do such an absurd amount of damage. So here we can see I have these boots, Bushwhack Lizard Scale boots. The bottom line of them says physical damage is pinning. So just with these boots, and these boots are not that, first of all, they're extremely cheap. You can get them for 1 Exalted. I actually have a corruption here that brings the 30% movement speed to 25% movement speed to 30%. Because movement speed, as we'll get into later, is pretty valuable. So I'm fully spec'd into that, but this basically gives insane amounts of Frenzy Charges with very little investment. Generally speaking, this pinning from Combat Frenzy is our main source of Frenzy Charge buildup, which is why I do put Profusion in there instead of Sniper's Mark. We also have a Wind Dancer as an aura. This is an acrobatics build, after all. We want as much evasion as possible, and this is insane for survivability. I have pin in there just to give some extra pinning, you know, I get hit, it pins them, I get a Frenzy Charge, I can spin. It's a really good safeguard for that. cannibalism in there to give some recovery. We don't want to waste affixes and skill points in this build. Getting some recovery here makes it a lot more comfortable. We don't have to spam our life flask if we get hit. Then clarity for mana regeneration rate, although this is pretty much not necessary, but it's pretty nice for bosses, which I'll get into later. Speaking of bosses, I should get into our boss setup. So, for bosses, we actually have a completely different setup. Spiral Volley is awful against bosses, completely unusable. So, we use this skill called Snipe. Snipe, I'll show you right here, charges backwards, and if you release at the perfect time, there we go. It has a guaranteed critical hit with insane amounts of increased critical damage. As you can see, 250% increased critical damage bonus. So, we can use this for bosses, because it is a single target damage. So we have a window of opportunity here, that gives 50% more damage, but it's harder to hit the shot. And then we have concentrated effect, and then I actually move Brutality and Heft from Spiral Volley into Snipe for when I do bosses. To combo with Snipe, we use Barrage. So since we're not using Spiral Volley to use our Frenzy charges, we can use Barrage instead with Snipe to absolutely make our damage way more. So we can use Sniper's Mark with Snipe normally, because Snipe is a guaranteed critical hit, to generate Frenzy charges. Then once we get up around to 7, which shouldn't be hard because we're Deadeye, we use our Barrage and then use our Snipe for insane amounts of damage. The damage gets up to into the millions, right? I've had a Snipe do around 4 million before, pretty easily. While we're waiting around, we can just throw down a rain of arrows to break their armor, and generally speaking, we don't have too hard of a time with bosses. This is not the best bossing build, but as you can see here, I've been able to clear Zesh 0, Zesh 1, and Zesh 2. So, it's definitely playable. Okay, now let's get into the gear for this build. So, to preface, the first thing I want to say is it's very, very important that in one of the pieces of gear you have, be it your rings, your amulet, your gloves, your weapon as a little extra tidbit, you need gain mana per enemy killed. You don't need a super high roll, but Spiral Volley is a spell with a very high mana cost, 285 for what I have with +3 projectile skills, and we are not investing anything at all into mana, and we don't want to. So this gain mana per enemy killed stat completely solves all of our issues. I have gain 21 mana per enemy killed. You can go for gain 15 and gain 14. You should be fine either way. You just need some. You're going to be killing a lot of enemies very fast, and this should help you out. Now moving on to our bow. So for our bow, let's start with the base type. You could use a Zealot bow. You could use a composite bow. You could use a Warden bow. I would say the two best base types for this build are a Zealot bow and a Warden bow. A Warden bow has the extra chaining, and a Zealot bow has super high base damage. Either way though, it's not actually that big of a deal as long as you don't use something like a dual string bow. You just need it to have a suitable physical DPS, which I'll go through later when I show you on the trade site how to buy a good bow. But for our bow, we don't care about attack speed. So what we can do is we invest completely into crit. So on our suffixes, you see I have critical hit chance and critical damage bonus. This critical damage bonus stat is very, very deceiving. It's not like critical damage bonus on another piece of gear if you have it there. Critical damage bonus for attack damage, you see there? This says 39% increased critical damage bonus for attack damage, and this says 37.2 critical damage bonus. It's multiplicative with all the rest of the critical damage bonus on your entire character. If you have 500 critical damage bonus from any other sources, this 37% will take 500 and multiply it by 1.37. It's insanely strong. So you would like to have a very high percent of that, but importantly as well, you need to have a high base critical chance. I would say over 4% is pretty mandatory. Other than that, the other rolls, generally speaking, just want to be physical damage. I have some cold damage on this bow, but it doesn't really do anything since I'm using brutality support anyway. It's in dexterity as well, which is great. Either way, I'll show you guys a cheap way to buy a bow like this later on in this video. For my helmet, I'm just stacking as much evasion as possible with some magic find and some resistances. This build is very, very strong for magic finding because you have such a high mobility and you have insane clear with very little need to invest in defenses. As you can see, I have a 1900 life and I'm still level 91 and I'm not 0%. So as you can see, I'm not dying super often. This is not my first build of the league, by the way. This is my second build of the league. So level 91 is pretty good in that regard. For my amulet, I have plus of projectile skills. I have maximum life, maximum mana, but that's not that important. It gives me a little bit of play for spamming though and making mistakes. And then resistances. I would say for you, go for a +1 level of proj skills, +2 level of proj skills, and make sure to just fill out your resistances, get some life. Accuracy is nice. Just fill it out, right? You don't need to have exactly what I have. On here, I have Anointed Leaping Ambush, which gives me a 100% increased critical hit chance against enemies on full life. If you can see from the passive tree, don't look at this right now, that ability is right over here, Leaping Ambush. And if you hold Alt, it says 3 distilled emotions: despair, guilt, guilt. Like going into our inventory, if you right click one of these, which you drop from the delirium mechanic in maps, it'll come up with this menu. So if you put a despair and then a guilt, guilt, and your amulet in here, you can anoint this notable onto your amulet, even though it's completely on the opposite side of the tree. This plays into our critical hit chance against enemies on full life method of just one-shotting an enemy from full life. On rings, you generally speaking want physical damage to attacks, resistances, and rarity if you can get it. Same thing for gloves, physical damage to attacks, resistances, rarity. Life is good on everything. Belt just wants resistances, charm slots, life. That's basically about it. And for your boots, we went over this before, but you are using the Bushwhack Lizard Scale boots, which make your physical damage pinning. Very cheap, 1 Exalted Orb. Very good for this build to allow you to generate more frenzy charges. The next thing we'll get into is our passive tree. Now, this is a more endgame style passive tree as I'm level 91 and I have all the gear set up online. I'll link a cheaper, easier version of the passive tree in the description below. But starting off, for your more endgame-ish setup, I am going down the evasion route because movement speed is here. So what you'll see as a very common theme in this build is we try to take as much movement speed as humanly possible. Movement speed is insane. The maps in PV2 are massive, and what are we gonna do, right? You can't really, even if you one-shot the entire screen, if you're moving too slowly, you're not gonna be able to get to the next pack. So we go fully into movement speed, as you'll see going forward. We use frenzy charges. So we have Savagery, Frenetic, and Fervor. That gives us 7 total frenzy charges. We have bonuses to our Quiver. Very good. Up here, we have Preemptive Strike. 100% increased critical damage bonus against enemies that are on full life. We're heavily investing into killing enemies that are on full life in one hit. Over here, it's the same thing. This entire cluster. Damage against enemies that are on full life. Critical hit chance against enemies on full life. So it's very much a kill the enemy on full life build. Death from Afar gives us more crit chance. Down here in the bow cluster, we take Sniper for more critical hit chance as well. We're heavily investing into crit. We don't take stuff like Pierce though. And we don't need stuff like this. This skill, Spiral Volley, chains once per frenzy charge consumed. We don't need Pierce for coverage. If we have 7 frenzy charges, every arrow will chain 7 times. And if you think about it, if every arrow is one-shotting an enemy, that's a lot of enemies in one shot with just 1 Spiral Volley. You really did not need Pierce, and it can actually be an active negative. because if there's a very thin layer of enemies, it can just go right through them, and you're really annoyed, right? Other things, attack speed is not that important, but like I said, movement speed is. So a lower priority thing is something like acceleration. Over here, we take chaining from terrain because it's very nice just to have a little bit of a chance to chain from terrain for those more smaller, more compressed maps like Koth Crypt, which is awful, but sometimes you gotta run it. Pin and run, which gives us increased pin buildup and a movement speed if we've pinned an enemy recently, which will be almost always for us. So we'll just get more movement speed from that. Up here we have more crit stuff, critical damage if we've done a critical hit recently, and that really is about it aside from our jewels. So on our jewels, generally speaking, we want to get movement speed. This is the general stat for a jewel. 2% movement speed, and then whatever the hell else you can get. So on this one over here, I have a pretty good one actually. Gives me damage against rare enemies and movement speed, evasion, crit, immunity to main. Very good jewel, honestly. So I actually go out of my way to get more jewels just to get some more movement speed. Because obviously movement speed is a very good stat. Down here, as the last cluster I'll show, we really would like to get more crit damage, obviously, so we take this, and this gives our base critical hit chance plus 1%, which is a massive bonus to it. So that is very, very strong. This is the general state of a passive tree. Like I said, it's not optimized completely. It's not completely at level 91, not level 95. So things are subject to change. The pathing might not be completely optimal. Maybe I kind of want to path over here for more speed. Maybe this is not the best way to go. Maybe going down here is better. I'm not entirely sure yet. We don't have path of building currently, right? So it's hard for me to really discern. Like I said, I'll post a easier version, a more leveling version before you are able to buy a critical strike chance bow. That will be optimal for you to pick. One last key thing to note is that we're taking all these evasion nodes and we're taking acrobatics. So acrobatics will give us less evasion rating by 70%, but we can evade all hits. So that means we can evade AoE hits. This makes the build so much more comfortable. If you look at my character sheet, I currently have 78 evasion, but in combat it goes up to around 83%. Which I would say above 80% is really what you want while you have acrobatics on. So that is kind of your discerning sign to click on acrobatics, is when you have enough evasion that when you click it, you'll still be above around 80 to 85% evasion. Which is a very, very nice thing. That's why you would like evasion stacking on your helmet, your chest plate, etc. Getting into our Ascendency points, we start off in the campaign in Act 2 by taking Tailwind. This will just let us get through the campaign with ease. Since we're probably going to be leveling with something like Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod, and Orb of Storms setup, which is what I would recommend, those three skills, Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod, Orb of Storms. This will let us just run through the campaign as fast as we can, right? But once we get to the end game, and we still only have 4 points available, and we start using Spiral Volley, I will actually spec out of Tailwind. So you go to the vendor, and I'll respec Tailwind. And I'll spec it into Avidity. I can't pronounce that very well. 30% chance if you would gain Frenzy Charges, you instead gain up to your maximum number of Frenzy Charges. So this is very, very good considering how often we're generating Frenzy Charges. We also have Perpetual Charge, so we can get into a loop where we're just sitting there at maximum charges, just spinning around very often, right? We don't have to worry about charges as much. And then over here, 50% chance to double your benefits from consuming charges. With 7 Frenzy Charges, that's 14 chains and an absurd amount of damage for our Spiral Volley, and an insane amount of snipes that go off. It's very, very strong. Then once you're strong enough to do the third lab, or Trial of the Secumas rather, you go back into Tailwind. And Tailwind increases your evasion by a lot, and it also increases your attack speed and your movement speed by up to 10%, which is very, very good. We, like I said before, we really want movement speed on this build, and on pretty much any build, if we're being honest. I haven't done my 4th lab yet. You would definitely want to just go for Wind Ward. It gives you 30% less damage taken. I haven't really seen a need to spend the time to really do it, just because of how strong the build already is. I'm easily just destroying maps, not really dying very often, so I just haven't really taken the time to do it yet, but I probably could already. Now there's one more key component of this build that I haven't really seen many people doing on most builds, and that is a weapon swap setup. Now as you can see from our gear, we have critical hit chance all over the place, right? On our bow, on our quiver, critical hit chance. But if you look at Snipe, wait, Snipe doesn't scale with critical hit chance. It has a guaranteed critical hit. You don't really want critical hit chance on Snipe. Even on our passive tree, we have things like plus 1% critical hit chance. We don't need that for Snipe. So what I've done is I've implemented a weapon swap setup to maximize our single target Snipe damage, which is what the build is really lacking, right? So that's what you want to maximize, especially with our full health setup. Generally speaking, on Snipe, you're not going to be hitting the enemy on full health, especially if it's a boss and it takes multiple snipes. So I have a secondary weapon. On this weapon, I do not have critical hit chance. I just have critical hit damage and as much physical damage as humanly possible. And on the bow, I also don't have critical hit chance. I have +2 to level of all projectile skills and critical damage bonus. This adaptation heavily increases your damage, but it doesn't just end with your gear. If you look at your passive tree, as you can see, if I swap to weapon set 1, this is the Spiral Volley setup. So as we can see right here, these nodes that give crit damage and crit chance on enemies that are full life are only in our red weapon set. Our red weapon set is our Spiral Volley setup. So here, these chaining's not important for Snipe. Snipe just hits the enemy and explodes. We don't need crit chance. We don't need crit chance over here. We don't really want to invest into full life damage for crit damage. So when we swap to our secondary set, I have to swap over here, swap, and then open my passive tree back up, we can see it reallocates. So we don't have this stuff anymore, and we are actually now invested into more damage. So up here, we have 30% more damage bonus, more damage if we dealt a crit recently. Critical damage bonus everywhere, right? Just to maximize our damage. Here we have 20% more crit bonus, 20% physical damage. Then we have this very strong notable as well. Reduced critical hit chance and increased critical damage bonus. This setup, I think, very, very much benefits Snipe. We just have more crit bonus everywhere, right? And it allows us to deal a lot more damage to bosses. You don't really have to worry about this more dexterity requirements, by the way. It's not relevant. One more thing I forgot to mention in the weapon swap section of this video is how you want to set up your weapon swap, actually. So if you go into the Snipe section, here you want to make sure your Snipe is checked to 2, and that and your Spiral Volley is checked to 1, and that's all that really matters. So Snipe is checked to 2, and Spiral Volley is checked to 1, and not checked to 2. This will make sure that you auto swap. You don't have to really worry about it. So the last thing I want to show you is, coming out of campaign, how to buy a usable bow. So we're here on the PoE2 trade site. You can log into the site up here with this URL, and then it will prompt you to log in with your Steam. It's an official site. You don't have to worry about anything like that. So we'll go to item category here, and we'll type in bow. And then we'll go into filters. We'll type in critical hit chance, and this is % to critical hit chance. And here for the minimum value, we'll type in we'll go for 3.7%. And then for critical damage bonus, this one as well, % to critical damage bonus, we'll type in 15%. We don't need a crazy starting bow, right? Just something to get us through maps. We can get up to very high tier maps without a super good bow. For physical damage, I would say type in around 210. Lots of the bows on here won't have runes socketed into them, which increases the damage by quite a lot. So it's going to be higher than 210 DPS. Okay, we hit search. And as you can see, pretty cheap bows, right? 1 exalted orb, 2 exalted orb, 3, 4 exalted, 4 exalted, 5 exalted. If you see here, it says divine orb. The trade site is actually a bit scammed right now. It's a bit bugged. So what you want to do here is go to buyout price and put an exalted orb, then hit search again. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. I would really recommend saving up the exalted orbs you got throughout the campaign and using them to buy one of these bows. Add the runes to it, add the iron runes for more physical damage, and you'll be very, very, very much in a good place after you do that. These bows as well, like if you look at this advanced Zealot bow, only has a dexterity requirement of 142. So I definitely make sure you look at the item, the required level. So this would be like a perfect item to buy, right? It has great stats. It only has a level requirement of 62. It only requires 142 dexterity. And you could put in 2 runes with iron runes and quality it. So it's a lot better than it looks, and it will get the job done for sure. As you can see, the skill has insane clear potential, and even with snipe you have pretty good single target damage. If there's anything you think I screwed up in this video, or any ways you think I can make the build better, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I intend to make many more build guides into the future, so thanks for watching.